Hi there, welcome to another episode of Women Talkin Bout AI. I'm Jessica Parker, and I'm here with my co-founder, Kimberly Becker. We are the co-founders of Moxie, and today we're going to talk about a recent study on using AI for essay grading. We'll talk about contrastive rhetoric and the True Scotsman fallacy.
So today we are diving into AI essay grading, and we'll be unpacking a recent study that's got the academic world's attention, exploring how different flavors of AI prompting, maybe different models, could have an effect on machine grading of student essays. So basically, the study, just to give you an idea, was conducted by the Educational Testing Service. It was a really big study comparing human graders to an AI model based on ChatGPT for Omni. It had 13,000 essays written by students in grades 8 to 12 between 2015 and 2019. And these were essays that were written as some sort of state standardized exam or some classroom assessment with topics like, should students be allowed to use cell phones in school? And so these were very much summative essays, a standardized test where there's just a grade and there's no revision. So basically, the researchers used GPT-4 Omni, which is the free version right now of ChatGPT, to grade the essays and then compared those scores to the human graders. And the score discrepancy was really interesting because ChatGPT consistently scored essays lower than human graders, which is also a finding that we discovered when we did our very first study on automated writing evaluation with ChatGPT. So I think that was really interesting. We were using a much earlier version of GPT, but it scored the essays we examined in the corpus lower. I think the really interesting piece, though, is that there were racial discrepancies in the scoring, and it was most pronounced for Asian American students. So the Asian American students received an average score of 3.2, and the other students had more like 4.3. So it's a 1.1 difference, but it's a small scale. So it's a pretty big overall difference. And then there was a gap for Black, white, Hispanic students, but it was much smaller. So then the question is, why would the machine score these Asian American student essays lower? And I have some ideas as a linguist, but before we get into any sort of linguistic nitty gritty, Jessica, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, when I first saw this study, I also am curious about why. I don't know why. We don't have the answer. I think that's part of the black box nature of a large language model is you can ask it for an explanation, but the reality is it's not giving you insight into exactly how it came to that decision. So I think that is a big question mark. But what I found more interesting or just as interesting were some of the reactions to this study on LinkedIn. And I saw one comment that it was really like an educator was viewing this as evidence that we should not be using AI for grading. And I'm not saying I don't disagree with that. We don't use AI for summative assessment. We're really big on using it for formative assessment, formative feedback rather. But what I found interesting about that argument was that basically this person was saying like we shouldn't be using AI in this way at all. Like AI is unable, and the reason why is because it's unable to account for differences in writing styles based on a person's like race and ethnicity and culture. And when I saw that, I immediately thought, are we doing that as humans? Am I adjusting my grading to take into account, do my rubrics actually reflect the different races and ethnicities and writing styles of my students? Or do I just have a rubric based on what the criteria are? And so I think that's true. I don't think that we're all creating separate criteria. And so then why would we suddenly expect the AI to do that? And I'm noticing that sort of trend in a lot of these conversations in education, which seems to be that there's a different standard that suddenly now we need for the AI to be good enough for us to accept it. It needs to be able to do things that we actually as humans aren't even doing. And so that's where my brain immediately went. But then you taught me something really interesting today, which I would love for you to share, which is about these differences in writing styles, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true that we don't want to just throw technology at a problem. Like it needs to be able to do something that we can't do as humans. But people seem to forget that the whole reason AI exists is because it was trained on human data. And that data is biased because humans are biased. And we can try as hard as we can to get the bias out, but what's biased to me is not biased to you. So anyway, that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, there's this theory in linguistics that is called contrastive rhetoric. And it's developed by a researcher named Kaplan. It has been criticized. It's been criticized because the theory is that different cultural backgrounds produce different structures of writing for specific reasons related to their views on politeness or their views on power differentials in interlocutor, the distance between if I'm talking to my mom, how I talk versus my a peer. And the researcher's name was Kaplan, who developed this. And basically, the theory is that your cultural background influences the structure of your conversation. So, English, for example, is very direct. We like to get to the point. We like to say, this is my point, and then we talk about that point, and then we conclude with a review of the point. And sometimes I've talked to people from other cultures when I've been teaching academic writing and I've been teaching these structures, and they're like, why do we just keep saying the same thing over and over again? They don't understand because to them it seems silly to be repetitive and duplicating what you just said. And it's different in other languages. And actually, there's a visual that goes with this. So let me show you the visual. Okay, so you see the English here is the straight line down, and it's very direct. So we like to get to the point. And then I'm going to skip over here to Romance language because I have learned a Romance language, so I understand this one a little bit more than the others. But in a Romance language, what typically happens is you start in that direct straight line, just like in English. But then you get to a point where you want to say something about a tangential topic. And so you jump over here to this other topic because that shows that you are interesting and informed about a lot of different topics, not just the one you're talking about, but this other thing. And then you come back to the point, or maybe you miss it just a little bit. You don't go straight down the line like we do in English. Then you jump to this other tangential thing, and then you finally get back to the point and conclude. And then for Oriental languages, now this is an older study, and so they do use the word Oriental, even though we usually don't use that word for humans. There is this idea that you want to be very polite and you want to respect the knowledge and the intellect of your reader, and so you hint at your main idea, and then you hint again, and after you drop all these hints, the reader picks up on the main idea without you having to say it, and actually coming out and saying it is very impolite. So different cultures approach this in different ways, and that could be why the AI graded those Asian American essays lower. Maybe it was like a subtle kind of picking up on the fact that it probably had a rubric, right? And the rubric uses this very Anglo-centric, direct, linear style of writing and values that. And if the writer wasn't going in a linear fashion with ideas, then it could have marked it down. So that's basically the theory. And people have criticized it because they say that it generalizes, it stereotypes, it makes English as at the center. It's very ethnocentric. But the point is that if you're writing in this language, then you write to what that language values. So I think in terms of assessment, it's different than just all linguistic analyses of these languages. When we're talking about assessment of English as an academic medium, then we have to consider what the culture values, right?
Yeah. And I think going back to some of the reactions to the study, and again, I just want to be clear, I do not use AI for grading or summative assessment, but the argument that I saw in reaction to that post is very similar to other types of arguments I'm seeing about AI in education, which is insinuating that as human educators, we're doing all of these things to ensure that it's equitable and it's not biased. And if the AI doesn't demonstrate the ability to do that, then it can't be used for that at all. And I just think that's ridiculous. I think it's almost laughable because I think if you're in the US, we know the issues we're having in our education system. And the reality is if we suddenly expect the AI to perform better than what we're able to do before we're willing to accept it, how is that meaning useful? It doesn't make sense to me, and um, I don't really understand that stance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I struggle with it too. Just from the perspective of being curious about tech and being curious about how about computer science, I don't understand it, and language. But so I've seen some very strong reactions from English professors, English teachers, and there is a animosity, shall we say, between some educators and ed tech companies.
And I think
But
rightfully so. There is a history of tech coming in and selling solutions and products that maybe aren't needed. They aren't informed by the educators and the students. So, on one hand, I understand it, but I also feel that as educators, our responsibility is to prepare the next generation for the world that they're going to inherit. And the world that they are going to inherit is an increasingly AI integrated world.
mhm,
And there's different perspectives there that I'm getting to. It's one thing to be like workforce ready. It's another thing to use AI for learning. I agree that we need research, we need evidence to demonstrate like how AI can and to what extent it can be used for specific learning outcomes. And I think all of that is important. I'm not suggesting that we don't do the research, but this resistance and this sort of putting humans on this pedestal, I think, is silly, because the reality is we're not doing that in education now. So why would we all of a sudden expect that the technology has to do it for us to even explore any opportunities with it? And yeah, so that stood out to me, and it got me thinking about this recent Substack, this audio Substack that David Shapiro did. It really stood out to me where he talked about the no true Scotsman fallacy in AI. And it got me thinking about these sort of arguments that I'm seeing in education. And so, the no, for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know what it was, I just learned through his podcast. So, basically, what the no true Scotsman's fallacy is that you have a person who's like defending an argument and they're basically moving the goalpost. They're changing the definition of the term to exclude different counter examples. And so I use Claude to give me a basic like life example, and then I'll give you an example in education. So this is how the no true Scotsman fallacy might look like if you're actually talking about Scotsman. So you could have someone that says like no true Scotsman would ever commit a crime. If this person committed a crime, they can't be a real Scotsman. And this is a fallacy. And instead of accepting the fact that their original claim is wrong, that a Scotsman could indeed commit a crime, they like stick to that, but they continue moving the goalpost about what an actual crime is. And so that moving the goalpost. And so when we think about what that looks like in education with AI, an example would be, let's say you have an educator who's usually like a purist aspect of it, where like AI tools like can't really enhance education. Only traditional, like tried and true teaching methods can actually lead to real learning. And then in response, another educator might say, yeah, but look right here. We have this AI powered learning platform, and we have evidence that it's helping teachers personalize instruction, and we're seeing increased engagement. And then the original educator might say, that's not real educational enhancement. Like true education needs to foster critical thinking. And then in response, the educator B might say, we actually have this AI system that is helping students solve complex tasks, and it's promoting critical thinking. And it's okay, that still doesn't count. Like real education requires human interaction and mentorship. And so
mhm,
the one educator is like shifting that definition of what real teaching is always to exclude AI, regardless of the fact that it has demonstrated capabilities and effectiveness. And like when you go to Dave's Substack, he gives some other examples, but he talks about like in the general world how people say AI isn't truly thinking. And he says that is irrelevant because it is practical and useful. And it just, all of this sort of comes together for me as there's a lot of similarities and overlap here, I guess, is what
mhm.
I'm getting at.
Yeah, I'm curious about that whole argument that is, it's not really thinking. It's not really writing. It's not really, these are just labels. These are just verbs. There's different, but what's the real difference between generating and composing and writing? And yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of semantics.
Yeah, it's semantics. I saw this, I think, overly simplified, but still useful example where someone was like, okay, if I give you a clean dish, if the objective is to produce a clean dish that you can eat off of, are you going to care if a human washed it with their hands or if a machine washed it, a dishwasher?
Mhm.
Like, it doesn't matter how it happened. If the output is useful and effective, these arguments, this splitting hairs, the semantics of what's actually happening behind the scenes is what's the value of that. I think philosophically, these are interesting debates, but like from a pragmatics perspective, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the language is doing what it's supposed to do, which is accomplish a communicative goal, then does it really matter? And I think right now, yeah, it does matter, but it won't. I think as we move forward, I think we'll just assume that everyone is hybridly, is there an adverb, hybridly? Writing with AI and using it to help them. And so there won't be a way to really know if it's pure or not.
And will it matter? I mean, I agree in
Will it matter?
education, depending on, yes, if you're in a class and the goal is to learn grammar, then sure, you need to be able to know if your student understands grammar.
Mhm.
I think for many of the use cases, especially we work with doctoral students who are becoming experts, so they're more advanced learners.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting position that I find myself in because I'm experimenting with AI and I'm looking at this output, and there's signs of it where I can tell, and I allow my students to collaborate with AI. And I'm still learning what are those boundaries and how do I instruct them and how do I account for this in my rubric and how do I shift my assessment? And it's all a really big question mark for me. But I am more of a pragmatist. Like at the end of the day, if my student is able to communicate a point, in this case, choose the right research design, craft quality research questions, design a study that's feasible, consider all of the ethical considerations for their
Mhm.
just like they normally would. Do I really care if that paragraph was crafted with AI, if it's doing what it needs to do and the student is able to apply that knowledge? I don't think so. And I don't think my take on it is going to be applicable for every other educator because it really, I think, depends on the learner, the academic level, the learning outcome. It's very individualized or case specific to the learning that's happening.
Yeah, and there are times when a student, I'm thinking about second language learners especially, but also me. And when I know a concept, but if someone else can say it to me in just a certain way, it's like I get it in a different way. They put the words and then the words together with the concept are what really seal the deal for me. It doesn't have to be my words. It just has to be words that I understand. And that there's something happening there with when we call it like negotiating meaning, and we just published an article about this with your students as the participants slash co-researchers,
Mm.
um, where they were, the title of the article is negotiating meaning with machines, because they are, and one of the findings was, as they see the machine repeatedly talking about this meta language that we use when we talk about writing, they started to pick up that meta language. They weren't having those conversations with anybody prior to that machine being there to reiterate these concepts from class. And it's the same thing that happens when a child grows up in a non-English speaking home, or when a child grows up in a home where people don't read to them and they're not getting that linguistic input constantly all the time, and then they go to school and they don't have the prior knowledge to build on, they come in at a deficit. There's lots of research in the world of language learning, which, I'm sorry, but all learning is language learning, that shows that when we have words to put to when we can convey it, then it seals the learning further into our neural networks.
Was heuristic, that's where meaning making
Yeah,
comes in.
scaffolding, all
Yeah.
that good stuff. Other thing about that study is that I haven't read it extremely carefully. I've read it for the main ideas, but I'm not sure what their prompt was to get the machine to score the essay. And one of the things that we know from Moxie's tools is that a simplistic prompt may not get you where you need to go. And part of what we do in AI literacy training is we look at these different prompt styles and how they can elicit better generations from the tool.
Yeah, with few shot, zero shot, one shot, few shot
Mhm.
prompting.
And these names are kind of I don't want to disparage the names, but it does seem like there could be better labels, more intuitive names. And none of this is stuff that we knew 18 months ago. If you had asked me what a few shot prompt is, I would have had no clue. But once I learned that shot essentially means example, then it was much easier for me to make sense of this. So when we teach this, we start with zero shot. A zero shot prompt is a prompt that asks for something and does not give any examples. Zero examples, zero shots. And so for some things, this can be just fine. And for other things, you need at least one example, hence the name one shot prompt. And then there are other things that are few shot prompts. And the few just means like a few examples worked into the prompt to give the machine ideas of what the output should look like. So increasing the complexity of the input so that you can get a better output.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, I think some people mistakenly feel like, okay, we need more examples based on the task. Is it a complex task? But that's not true. I think
Mm-hmm.
the best example is, for lack of a better word, is when we think about math. So large language models there's a reason they don't count very well. They're not built to be math models. They are mathematical models of communication, but they're not math models. And so that's why they don't count really well. And so when you look at benchmarks, like when Gemini Pro 1.5 came out, they had this crazy benchmark for mathematical computations. But when you read the fine print, it actually took 8 shots in order to get that accuracy. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just look at, 98% accuracy for
Mm-hmm.
these type of advanced level calculations. But the reality is you need to give it examples in order
Mm-hmm.
to get that level of accuracy. And so then that leads into, should you be using it for that task if you're not even capable of giving it that example or those examples? That kind of assumes that the person using it to get that accuracy is capable of giving it the examples
Mm-hmm.
and then evaluating the output. And that opens up like a whole other can of worms that I find interesting around like drawing the line as an educator when your students should or should not be using it. But there's all sorts of things that it's really great at with zero shots. And then there's all sorts of things that it's good at and even better at when you give it lots of examples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just looking at my phone because I got a text from a friend earlier this week, and it says, I started working with AI in my writing classes. And this is a person who's a professor up in Canada. And she says, the thing that strikes me this semester is how disappointed they all seem to be with it. I think the media and companies may have overhyped the power of AI. And I said, yes, I totally agree. People think it's fast, they think it's like a quick fix to something. And it may or may not be. If you ask it a simple question about something very well known in the training data, it's going to give you a very fast answer that's probably better than something you could come up with.
Mhm.
But if it's a more complex use case, it may not be that you may have to iterate on that, or you may have to give it a few shots, a few examples, but it's not always a magic button.
No, I think just the perfect example is when I didn't know what the True Scotsman fallacy was. I asked Claude what it was, and then I asked it to help me explain it in lay terms and to give me an example in education. So in that case, yes, speed. Like it helped me. I would have normally had to go on Google. I would have really had to think about creating that example. It would have taken me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, it definitely increased my speed and efficiency. And that was a very low stakes task.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think about the research that we're doing, the higher stakes task, where I'm preparing a keynote for October, and it's really thoughtful. I want it to have certain points in the keynote, and it's taking me a lot of time, a lot of back and forth with the AI, where I go and reflect, and then I go in and iterate. And my goal is not to create my keynote speech faster. My goal is to create something better, higher quality than I think I could do on my own because I'm
Mm-hmm.
able to iterations. And so it's what is your goal? And if your goal is to just do something to just speed up the task. Sure, it can do those things, but I think from an academic perspective, when you're trying to learn, the whole point
Mhm.
of learning is the friction. Is It's not supposed to be fast and easy. Um,
That's right.
I tell my
Yeah.
students that when I teach them how to use AI, I'm like, you're probably going to be annoyed because things are going to now just take you longer than it normally would by me making you start to learn how to use AI. But the point is not to write this paper faster.
Right. I mean, especially in graduate school, the whole point is you're becoming an expert. You're not going to press a button and become an expert. You have to defend. You may be able to at some point generate a dissertation. Now is not how that AI works, but at some point that may happen in the world of AI where you can press a button
Mhm.
and generate. I don't know. If dissertation seems such a far shot, such a far example. But then could you defend it? The final assessment for a doctoral degree is called a defense. You defend what you've written orally. And I just don't think defense is very high in Bloom's taxonomy. Argumentation, counter argumentation, that's a very high level. And you don't get to that point by pressing a magic button. But you could get to that point by going back and forth with the machine and with humans. It's just another interlocutor that has joined our conversation and is part of our development now.
Yeah, I agree. And I remind my students of the whole point of going to graduate school. It's advanced and it takes
Mhm.
time. You think you're going to go into a PhD program and just zip right through it, and you're not going to have challenges. You should probably not be enrolling in a PhD program. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, especially for people who are doing it just to get another rung on the ladder. And they really don't care about the research, but the whole assessment process is based on research. Yeah. I do think EDD programs are moving in a better direction with the whole scholar practitioner thing.
yeah, it's more
But
practical.
yeah.
It's much more. I'm a pragmatist. I tend to focus on the practical application
Mhm.
of things. I love theory and I love philosophy and I love those conversations. But at the end of the day,
Mhm.
I come from a healthcare background. That is how my brain is wired to think about teaching and learning and research. And so I tend to always go down that path of, is this practical? Can you implement it? And can you make a difference in your practice setting and your research? I really enjoy.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, the other thing that came up this week that I'm thinking about is from your teaching and your students using AI to generate their discussion posts
Mhm.
and you having to, which is all on social media, is professors talking about what do I do? How do I manage this? Do I call it out? Do I ignore it? Is it the norm? It's really a pressing issue. What do you think you're going to ultimately do?
It's hard because I'm teaching them how to use AI. I'm focusing on AI literacy and I allow them to use AI in the course, but I'm still learning how my course needs to be restructured and how I need to adapt my assessment, my discussion post. Because this is a program that is designed for these students to come out as leaders in their healthcare organization. So it is very practical and they're doing an action research study. It's all practical. And so for me, it's overdue. I need to redo my discussion questions anyways. I want there to be more meat, more depth about their personal experiences in their practice setting, and then how are they applying what they're learning based on their individual context. And that's
Mhm.
not something AI knows. Like AI can generate a definition. And so a lot of my discussion posts, I mean, have been designed to go along with the textbook. And so a lot of it is like knowledge recall. And what's clear is I need to redesign the questions to focus more on them reflecting on, in this case, what is a problem of practice? How can they apply the concepts that they're learning about in class, which right now they're learning about different research methods to the study of that problem? And that's something that is very uniquely them. Now, whether or not they use AI to help craft the ultimate response that uses all of that experience and insight, I really don't know if I care. I'm still trying to figure out, like, do I care?
Mhm.
Now, if it's my academic writing course and I'm evaluating their writing, that's different, but that's not this course. Yeah, I find it fun though. I have conversations with you about it. I talk to other educators about it. And for me, it's all just like a puzzle. It's like
Mhm.
this new puzzle that I need to solve, and AI is in the puzzle, and how do I readjust? Um, but I'm also a bit more relaxed about things. Like I like to observe and watch things play out and get some feedback from the students. I don't tend to just jump to
Mhm.
or cutting corners, especially since I'm experimenting so much right now with AI in my
Yeah.
students. I'm just doing a lot of observing and thinking. But I did just go in and change my discussion post, the prompts for next week, because I want to see more of that depth in their work. And I think that
Mhm.
right now, because it's so easy to get really polished, strong writing with AI, a lot of that depth is missing.
Mhm.
It's misleading.
Mhm. Yeah, it's academic writing. It really is, even if it's a discussion board, it really is still a conversation. It's a conversation. The student is guiding the conversation. In a discussion board, it's happening with the other students, it's happening with the professor. And then the student is also expected to bring in the voices of other scholars and other research. And so it's a lot to manage. It's a whole lot to manage. And humans can develop great skills in this area where we synthesize that knowledge and bring it together. That's what academics do. But when you're a novice and you're just learning, it's very hard to manage the complexity of that kind of academic conversation, to manage all of those different voices and to know what your position is amongst them. So, how do you take a strong stand when the teacher is the expert? How do you critique or counter argue with scholars who have very established research in their background? It's a it breeds imposter syndrome where it's like, where do I stand in the midst of all this? And yet they have to learn how to be a voice in that existing conversation. I think that's the real struggle of graduate students, and why we see people, they don't know how to become disciplinary insiders.
Mhm.
They're standing outside, they're wanting to get in, and they just don't know how to do that. It's a process. It really is a process.
It is. And it goes back to like your identity. They don't
Hmm.
identify as an insider,
Hmm.
as a scholar, as an
Hmm.
expert. And so they struggle, but the struggle is part of the learning.
Hmm.
And I think if we get to the point where
Hmm.
we just want to bypass all of that struggle and that friction, then we're in trouble. And that AI or not, we're in trouble.
Hmm.
But the reality is we get to choose what we're going to do with this. And I don't think I can't make an informed choice until I use it and I experiment with it and I talk to others about it. And so I am having
Hmm.
fun. I just think of it as like this big experimentation phase where I'm learning, my students are learning. And it's honestly the most fun I've ever had teaching. I know a lot of people
Hmm.
don't feel that way, but I'm
No.
I'm obviously embracing it.
Yeah, for a bunch of like people who really love science and got into and wanted to be academics because they love science, it's not being viewed as an experiment where we're changing variables. And it's, if I know people feel like they have been attacked, like there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of defensiveness and there's a lot of black and white, like, positioning where people are just like, it's either this or it's that. And that isn't true of anything really, but especially in this case, we have that spectrum of human AI writing that we post about a lot. There's fully human writing where no AI is involved, and then there's fully synthetic writing where no human is always involved because there's a prompt, but mostly the output is not iterated on, it just comes out. But there's a lot in the middle there. There's like where the human starts, bounces it off the AI, and then iterates, and then there's more AI involvement. And when we see it on a spectrum, we can tolerate a lot more of the inherent risk of getting the technology involved.
Mhm.
Interestingly, one thing that we know about really good language learners is that they have a high tolerance for risk. They are willing to put themselves out there and make mistakes and be corrected. And that is where that learning happens, because getting corrected is the friction you need to get to the next level of whatever linguistic thing you're trying to accomplish. And so, yeah, it's that friction, so important. And I think we are living in a convenience oriented society that just wants a fast answer. It's just not, there aren't any fast answers, even in AI,
No,
especially AI.
I agree. And I am comforted by the fact that we've been here before. I do think AI is a bit of a
Mhm.
different beast, but
Mhm.
I am comforted by the fact that everyone was up in arms when we got the internet and personal computers. It's like, oh my gosh, the email, the text message is going to erode the written word and reduce the quality of writing and the depth of ideas. But that didn't happen. We adapted. So I feel confident that we'll be able to adapt. I have hope. I'm optimistic.
Yeah. On that note, should we do a pit and a peach?
Yeah. What's your
You go first.
okay? I'll say my pit. Why is it weird to think of the negative thing? It's just human nature. So
Mhm.
I was driving. First of all, in North Carolina, it was raining for 6 straight days. I was driving my car to take my dog to the groomer, and it just turned off. It was like rush hour morning traffic. My car just turned off. I coasted into a parking lot. It's pouring rain. 2 hours later, my dog's at the groomer and I'm home. And then the car dealership, no communication with me for 2 days. I ended up borrowing someone else's car. Anyway, so that was annoying. It just felt very inconvenienced. So that was my pit. You go next, and then I'll think about the peach.
Okay, my pit of the week was attempting to negotiate with a teenager what he was going to wear to a homecoming dance.
Mhm.
And not and I really didn't want to bring the other mom, like his date's mom, into it, but he wanted to match her dress. And so I needed to know what color the dress was so that I could get a tie to match. And then we were arguing about what is the proper formality level of the attire. Is it a suit? Is it a coat and tie? Is it just a shirt and tie? What? Yeah. And a lot of this got solved in the JCPenney fitting room here in Ames, Iowa, because that's really the only place we have for any formal clothes. And I wasn't willing to go to Des Moines. So it was just a lot of really bad communication on my part and his part. Like, we were just going at it. But
Yeah.
we got a tie. We got a tie. It is the perfect color.
Coral. Nice.
Coral. Yes, coral.
Did you go with a bow tie or?
We have both because you can never assume that one is enough. In fact, we have two ties and we have three, can't count them, three bow ties. We can take back the ones that he doesn't wear, but it's very hard to do this whole matchy match thing.
It's tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky. I used to think, at least with girls, it's so hard. You got their clothes and they're never, and I don't know. With a girl, it's just like a dress.
I don't know. I agonized
Oh,
over
sure. Me too.
and it's funny because my parents are moving right now. My mom just found my one of my prom photos, which was a coral.
Oh my goodness. That's what we need is we need to have a throwback.
I share that photo. And
Oh.
looking back at it, oh, it was full on thin eyebrows of the early 2000s. I can't even tanning bed days. I was so unnaturally tanned. But I will never forget going, like, my mom gave me some leeway and was like, you can go pick out the dress. And I bought a dress that she would not let me wear. It was not
Was
appropriate.
it too short?
It was too low cut.
Okay.
And so then I had to go back and I got another dress. So the dress in this photo is the one that my mother felt comfortable with me wearing. But I just remember there being a lot of drama that year. So I like totally empathize with you and what you just went through and then getting your hair. Oh my gosh, I just don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, me too. But I think the difference is that we started way earlier. And I had been out of town for a conference. And prior to that, I was out of town for visiting you. And of course, we waited till the last minute. And
Yeah.
yeah. So that was my pit of the week. It was Hoko dance attire
Mm.
drama.
I'd say JCPenney would probably be right there. I can't go in stores. I just can't. I actually broke down this week and went into a Trader Joe's then I went in and I was like, this is not that bad. Like I went late. There was no one really there, but I'm becoming like my father. I'm so just I don't like public places. I have notoriously ordered things and I will pay to ship them back instead of Costco. I could throw a rock. It's like right there. I will pay for shipping and return
No.
shipping before I walk foot in that Costco. So for me
Well,
as a mother, if I have to go into a JCPenney, it's just not happening. Like
it was the last resort, the very last resort. Okay, what's your peach? That was a lot of pitting.
yeah,
Oof,
I know. We need to find something happy. I cooked for myself.
stop.
I did.
Spaghetti?
No, something new. I went to Trader Joe's. So for those of you who don't know, I don't cook. I don't know how y'all would know that, but I don't cook. I basically live off of spaghetti. I make a huge pot of spaghetti every week, and I will eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for several days until it is out. And yes, I'm very deficient in all of my vitamins.
And then, like, why is my stomach hurting?
Yeah. So I stepped out of my box and I went to Trader Joe's and I bought butternut squash ravioli and a vodka, that creamy vodka sauce.
Mm.
So it wasn't like I made it from scratch. I just boiled the noodles, the ravioli. But I did that and it was delicious. And it reminded me that I can do hard things. I can go into a grocery store and pick out my own ingredients for a meal and cook it.
Yes.
And it tasted
There's another podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. Maybe they will invite us on to share our
good.
strength and
Mhm.
hope.
I was like, I could just do Wegmans delivery, but I was hungry and I needed food now. I didn't want to wait for anyway. So yeah, that was my peaches. I was like, I sent a photo to my partner and he was shocked. He was like, you don't ever cook for me. I was like, well, listen, I'm not saying it's delicious, but
Mhm.
yeah, so that was my peach. I went to the store and I made myself dinner and it was good. Yay.
Good. Trying to think what my peach is. My husband has had tickets to a soccer game,
Mhm.
like a professional soccer game. I'm not really a sports fan. I'm not interested in sports. I am interested in women's basketball, I have to say. Have gotten very interested in that. Thank you, Caitlin Clark. But he had these tickets, and and he invited his dad, and his dad ended up not being able to come. And so he was like, "We can go together, and it could be a date night." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I want that to be a date night." But my older son is going to come home from college tonight and attend the game with him, and I don't have to go, which means I get,
That,
which means,
we'll keep that in. That's real life.
real life,
Okay.
which means I have to get the whole house to myself and I can watch a show. I can watch a movie. I can watch whatever I want.
What are you going to watch? You just finished Bad
Bad Sisters.
Bad
So
Sad.
good. Yes. Bad Sisters. It's an Irish show. So good and bad. But yeah, I don't know. I send me suggestions because I don't have a show right now. Can y'all see my upside down dog?
George.
George is
Look
like
at him.
completely upside down.
He looks like he's chasing a squirrel. His little feet are moving.
He's looking at me. He's always got one eye on me. Is she going to move? If she stands up, I'm out of here because he is with me every step of the way.
Yes, that's like my dog. Oh,
I
he's
think
so
he's
cute.
stuck, actually. I think his head is, yep, there he goes. Now
Yes.
he's getting unstuck. This is riveting. Riveting. There's another dog over there. She's out cold.
Holly.
Holly.
Here. Oh, she's
She's
laying up
sleeping.
on the couch. Yeah.
That's a scarf. That's a winter scarf that I don't wear that someone gave me as a gift.
I can't, I would just love to be able to nap. I told you I tried to take a power nap yesterday, which I'm never able to do. And my cat decided that she wanted to sit on top of me and groom.
Mm-hmm.
So I could not take a nap. I was
Mm-hmm.
it.
I can't take a nap unless I do a yoga nidra guided meditation, which is like a guided nap.
That's a good
Yeah.
idea. I should do that.
Yeah. And then they wake you up at the end. It's like a hypnotic thing that you get brought out, some of them.
Hmm.
Okay, this is going way off the rails.
All right, let's cut this off. All right. Thanks, guys.
Come back for
Yeah.
more.
See you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.